A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
Welcome back to My Weird Prompts. This is episode 1304. I am Korn, and as always, I am joined by Herman Poppleberry. It is March 17th, 2026, and we are deep into the spring season here at the studio. Today is one of our favorite types of episodes to record. It is a listener letter day. We've been doing these for years now, and the quality of the correspondence we get from you all just keeps getting higher. You are really digging into the deep tracks of the archive, going back to the early days of the show, and holding our feet to the fire when we miss a nuance or skip over a critical piece of data.
You are right, Korn. We often spend our weeks buried in white papers, researching specific prompts, or doing deep dives into emerging technology and shifting global policy. But the listener letters allow us to see how these abstract ideas are actually landing in the real world. They provide a necessary sanity check. They remind us that these are not just intellectual exercises, they are issues that affect people's lives, their businesses, and their communities. Today we have a letter that is less of a question and more of a full-scale broadside against a topic we have touched on before, but perhaps not with the level of skepticism it truly deserves.
This letter comes from Jason in Tel Aviv. Jason, thank you so much for writing in and for being such a dedicated listener. He is responding to some of our previous discussions around global finance and social engineering, specifically the movement known as impact investing. For those who might have missed our earlier coverage, like in episode 922 where we looked at the work of Sir Ronald Cohen, impact investing is the idea that you can generate a financial return while simultaneously achieving a measurable social or environmental goal. It is often pitched as the evolution of capitalism, the invisible heart of the market. It sounds lovely on a brochure, does it not? But Jason is not buying the brochure. Not one bit. He sees something much darker beneath the surface.
He certainly doesn't pull any punches. I will paraphrase his opening here because he gets right to the point without any fluff. Jason says that a friend recently explained the concept of impact investing to him in detail, and he finds it to be one of the most hypocritical and intellectually dishonest movements he has ever encountered. He calls it a dangerous wolf in sheep's clothing and argues that policymakers must actively resist its influence before it completely hollows out our public institutions. He breaks his critique down into 4 very sharp, very specific points. Korn, I think we should take these one by one because they hit on some very uncomfortable truths about the current state of what we might call globalist finance in 2026.
Let's do it. Jason's first point is about the imposition of values. He writes that this is essentially a bunch of rich people, predominantly financial types from the global north, dictating moral values to the rest of the world, particularly the developing world. He finds the financialization of human life offensive. He hates the idea that all our problems can be solved with financial incentives or by holding the stick of not meeting key performance indicators over the heads of social delivery organizations. Herman, this feels like the core of the moral argument. It is the idea that if a village in Africa needs clean water, we should not just help them because it is a fundamental human right, but because we can turn that water into a unit of impact that pays out a dividend to a fund manager in London or New York.
Jason's hitting on a fundamental shift here, and it goes even deeper than just the profit motive. What we are seeing is the extension of the logic of the spreadsheet into the most intimate and sacred parts of human existence. When you turn a social good into a financial asset, you fundamentally change the nature of that good. This is a concept often called the commodification of everything. If you look at the history of development aid, there was always a level of paternalism, certainly. But impact investing takes that paternalism and gives it a high-octane profit motive. It tells a local nonprofit in a developing nation that they only get their funding if they hit these specific metrics that were decided in a boardroom 6,000 miles away by people who have never stepped foot in their province. It strips away the agency of the local community. They are no longer citizens or neighbors. They are data points in an impact report designed to make a billionaire feel like a saint while his capital grows at 7% per annum.
And it assumes that the financial types are the ones qualified to set those values in the first place. That is what Jason is hitting on. Why is a hedge fund manager or a private equity partner the arbiter of what a successful community looks like? They are trained to maximize efficiency and extract value. But a healthy society is often intentionally inefficient. It requires grace. It requires tradition. It requires things that do not fit into a rigid performance metric. When you apply the stick of financial consequences to social delivery, you end up with what we call Goodhart's Law. This is a critical concept for our listeners to understand. Goodhart's Law states that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. If a school in a developing nation is funded based on literacy test scores because that is the impact metric, they will stop teaching history or art or social skills and just drill for the test. You have solved the metric. You have paid out the investor, but you have failed the human being.
That is the danger. You see this in the healthcare space too. If an impact bond is tied to reducing hospital readmissions, the provider might just stop admitting people who are likely to return, even if they need care. They are gaming the system to ensure the financial return. This leads directly into Jason's second point, which is the total lack of a democratic mandate. Jason points out that nobody asked impact investors to save the world. Nobody elected these people. Yet, they are increasingly positioning themselves as a parallel track to government, or in some cases, a replacement for it. They are preaching to the rest of us how society should function without any accountability to the public.
This is the technocratic trap, Herman. We have talked about this in the context of the World Economic Forum and the Davos crowd in episode 1154. There is this growing class of unelected elites who truly believe they have the right and the duty to manage the world's problems, because they are the only ones with the smarts and the capital to do it. But democracy is messy. It involves voters and debate and compromise and the possibility of being wrong. Impact investing circumvents all of that. It is a private contract between a funder and a provider. If they decide that the best way to solve climate change is to force a specific type of industrial agricultural transition on a country, the people living there have no say in the matter. They cannot vote out the fund manager. They cannot protest the key performance indicators.
And let's be honest about the political leanings of this movement. It is overwhelmingly aligned with the globalist progressive agenda that often runs roughshod over national sovereignty and traditional values. They use the language of impact to push policies that would never pass a popular vote. It is a way to implement a global social credit system by stealth. If you can control the flow of capital based on whether a company or a country meets your specific social criteria, you have more power than any legislator. You are effectively governing through the market. This is why Jason calls it a deceptive front. It wears the fleece of charity, it speaks the language of empathy, but it has the teeth of totalizing control. It is about who gets to decide what is good, and in this model, the person with the most money always wins the argument.
Jason's third point is about the echo chamber. He says impact investing seems to consist mostly of a conference circuit where a few speakers applaud one another. He notes that the people they are supposedly trying to help do not seem to interest them much or have a seat at the table. This is something we have seen firsthand in the way these elite circles operate. It is a closed loop of virtue. You go to a conference in Aspen or Davos. You hear a panel on systemic change. You have a cocktail with a consultant from McKinsey, and you all agree that you are the vanguard of a new era.
It is the ultimate reputation laundering scheme. We covered this a bit in episode 987. You have these massive investment firms that might be doing some pretty cold-blooded things in their main business, like predatory lending or environmental destruction, but then they have this impact arm that sponsors panels at the Clinton Global Initiative. They hire the same consultants, they use the same buzzwords like theory of change and blended finance, and they all congratulate each other on how they are disrupting poverty. But if you look at the guest lists for these high-level summits, Where are the local leaders from the communities being impacted? Where are the small business owners from the regions they are transforming? They are usually just props in a slide deck. The actual decision making is done by people who have never lived a single day in the conditions they are trying to fix.
It creates a massive disconnect between the perceived success of the movement and the actual reality on the ground. When the metrics are designed by the people who are being paid to meet them, you get a lot of happy talk. The echo chamber ensures that no one ever asks the hard questions. No one asks if the $500 million spent on a social impact bond for recidivism actually helped the former inmates reintegrate into society, or if it just created a new layer of bureaucracy for consultants to manage. The incentive is always to declare victory, publish a glossy report with photos of smiling children, and move on to the next conference. It is a self-perpetuating industry of virtue signaling.
And that brings us to the fourth and perhaps most technical point Jason raised, which is the flawed metrics of impact accounting and pay for success. He says the idea that we can price human impacts according to a formula is misguided, and that the evidence supporting these models is incredibly weak once you peel back the gloss. He is hitting on a very real academic and practical failure here. Let's talk about those pay-for-success models, also known as social impact bonds or SIBs. The theory is that a private investor puts up the money for a social program, like a program to reduce homelessness or improve early childhood education. If the program hits its targets, the government pays the investor back with interest.
The logic is that the government saves money on long-term costs, like emergency room visits or future incarceration, and the investor gets a return. It is marketed as a win-win. But in practice, these are incredibly complex and expensive to set up. The legal fees, the management fees, and the cost of independent evaluators often eat up a huge chunk of the capital before a single dollar reaches the person in need. And more importantly, the evidence that they actually work better than traditional government funding is thin to non-existent. In many cases, the government ends up taking on more risk than the private investor.
There was a famous early example in the United Kingdom, the Peterborough Prison Bond, which aimed to reduce recidivism. It was touted as a revolutionary success and used to launch the entire movement. But when you looked at the actual numbers, the results were marginal at best, and it was unclear if the bond itself was the reason for the improvement or if it was just general trends in the criminal justice system. Yet, because it was an impact bond, it was marketed as a miracle. The problem is that human behavior is not a linear equation. You cannot simply input $5 million and output a 10% reduction in drug addiction. There are too many variables. But the impact investors need those variables to be fixed so they can calculate their internal rate of return. This leads to what I call the quantification of the qualitative. They try to put a dollar value on things like dignity or community cohesion or the joy of learning, which is inherently absurd.
It is more than absurd, Herman. It is dangerous. When you start pricing human outcomes, you are creating a market for human behavior. What happens when it becomes more profitable to manage a problem than to solve it? If an investor is getting a steady return on a contract to manage a social issue, do they really want that issue to go away? Or do they just want to meet the minimum threshold of the contractual targets to keep the checks coming? It turns the suffering of the vulnerable into a yield-bearing asset class. Jason is right to be disgusted by that. It is a fundamental shift in how we view our obligations to our fellow citizens. We are moving from a model of solidarity and duty to a model of transaction and arbitrage.
And we have to ask about the ulterior motives here. From what we know of how power operates, it is rarely just an accident. Impact investing provides a perfect mechanism for large financial institutions to capture public services. If you can convince a cash-strapped government to outsource its social safety net to private impact investors, you have effectively privatized the state. You have turned public policy into a series of investment vehicles controlled by Wall Street. This gives the financial sector immense leverage over the government. If the government wants to change a policy that might affect the return on an impact bond, the investors can sue or pull their capital. It is a massive transfer of power from the ballot box to the trading floor.
That is the more sinister angle that Jason hints at. It is about control. By setting the standards for what constitutes a good impact, These unelected groups can effectively blacklist companies or even countries that do not adhere to their specific ideological goals. We see this with the broader environmental, social, and governance movement, which is the cousin of impact investing. If you do not follow the prescribed path on social engineering or energy policy, your cost of capital goes up. You are frozen out of the markets. It is a way to enforce a global consensus without ever having to win an argument or a vote. It is the ultimate soft power weapon for the globalist elite. They are building a world where you can only participate in the economy if you agree with their definition of progress.
Jason asks policymakers to resist this, and I think the alternative is a return to two things that have actually worked in the past: genuine, unencumbered free market capitalism and traditional local philanthropy. If you want to lift a country out of poverty, you do not do it with a social impact bond that pays out to a hedge fund in Greenwich. You do it by protecting property rights, enforcing the rule of law, and allowing local entrepreneurs to build businesses and create jobs. Real capitalism has done more to reduce global poverty than every impact investment fund combined. It does not need a complex formula or an unelected board of directors. It just needs freedom and the opportunity for people to trade value for value.
And on the social side, we should look back to the model of local, community-based charity. People helping their neighbors because they share a common bond of faith or nationality or community. That is where the most effective social work happens. It is not scalable in the way a global fund manager wants it to be, because it is based on personal relationships and local knowledge. But that is exactly why it works. It treats the person as a human being with a soul, not a data point in a pay-for-success contract. We need to empower local institutions, churches, and civic groups rather than outsourcing our conscience to the financial sector. When you outsource your morality to a fund manager, you lose the very thing that makes charity meaningful.
I think Jason's critique is a necessary wake-up call. Impact investing is often presented as this benign, win-win solution for the world's problems. But when you look at the lack of accountability, the flawed metrics, and the potential for massive power grabs, it looks much more like a tool for technocratic control. It is a way for the people who already have all the money to also have all the moral authority. They want to be the ones who define what is good and then get paid by the taxpayer to deliver it. It is a perfect circle of elite capture.
It is a closed system of power. Jason, thank you for this letter. You have really helped us sharpen our focus on this. I think your description of it as a wolf in sheep's clothing is perfect. It is predatory finance wearing the mask of social justice. We need to be very careful about any movement that claims it can solve the world's deepest problems through the same financial mechanisms that often cause those problems in the first place. We cannot solve the crisis of financialization with more financialization.
And I would add that we should be especially skeptical when the evidence for success is as weak as it is here. If these were traditional investments, they would be laughed out of the room for their lack of performance and high overhead. But because they are impact investments, they get a pass. They get to hide behind their good intentions. We need to hold them to the same standards of rigor and accountability that they claim to be bringing to the social sector. If they cannot prove that they are actually making things better without just creating a new class of middlemen and consultants, then the whole movement should be dismantled. We should not be subsidizing the virtue signaling of the ultra-wealthy with public funds.
We should mention that if you want to dive deeper into the history of how we got here, check out episode 922 on Sir Ronald Cohen. He is often called the father of impact investing, and understanding his worldview is key to understanding why this movement looks the way it does. He truly believed that the moral engine of the market could do what the invisible hand could not. But as Jason points out, when the heart is made of cold hard cash and is beating inside a boardroom in Tel Aviv or London or New York, it might not be as warm as advertised. It might just be another pump for the same old system.
I am also reminded of our discussion in episode 852 about the post-capitalist economy. Some people argue that impact investing is a step toward a more humane version of capitalism, but I think it is actually the opposite. It is the final stage of financialization, where even our virtues and our social bonds are turned into commodities. It is not an evolution of capitalism, it is a distortion of it. True capitalism requires a clear separation between the market and the moral sphere. When you collapse them into one another, you end up with a system where everything is for sale and nothing is actually sacred. You end up with a society that knows the price of everything and the value of nothing.
That is a powerful point, Herman. We have to protect the spaces in our lives that are not meant for profit. Whether it is our families, our faith, or our local communities, those are the things that give life meaning. Trying to turn them into an asset class is a recipe for a very hollow and controlled society. Jason's letter from Tel Aviv is a reminder that people all over the world are starting to see through the gloss and the marketing of these globalist movements. They are starting to ask who really benefits when the world's problems are turned into investment opportunities.
It is a global pushback. People want sovereignty. They want to make their own decisions about their values and their futures. They do not want to be managed by an enlightened elite using formulas they do not understand and metrics they did not choose. The resistance to impact investing is part of a larger movement to reclaim the human scale of life from the giants of global finance. It is about saying that some things are too important to be left to the market.
Well, I think we have given Jason's letter the thorough discussion it deserved. It was a provocative prompt, and it led us into some very important territory. Jason, we appreciate you taking the time to write such a detailed and thoughtful critique. You are exactly the kind of listener that makes this show what it is. You are not just consuming the content, you are challenging it and pushing us to look deeper.
I'm with you there. To our other listeners, if you have a topic you think we have been too soft on, or if you have a perspective from your corner of the world that we are missing, please let us know. We do not just want to talk at you, we want to engage with the ideas that are shaping your lives. Whether it is about finance, technology, or the changing political landscape, your letters help us stay grounded and keep our focus where it belongs.
We are going to wrap it up there for episode 1304. If you enjoyed this listener letter episode, you can find more like it on our website at myweirdprompts.com. We have an archive of over 1,300 episodes covering everything from the deep state to the future of energy. You can search by topic or just browse the feed to see what catches your eye.
And if you want to be the next Jason, you can reach out to us. Send your letters to show@myweirdprompts.com or use the contact form on our website. We read every single one, even if we cannot get to all of them on the air. Your feedback is what keeps this show moving forward and keeps us honest.
You can also find us on Spotify, or you can subscribe via our Telegram channel or the regular RSS feed at myweirdprompts.com/feed.xml. We want to make sure you can find us wherever you get your podcasts, free from the gatekeepers.
Thank you for listening, and thank you for being part of this community. We will be back soon with another deep dive into the weird and the unexplained. Until then, stay curious, keep your eyes open, and keep questioning the narratives that are handed down to you.
This has been My Weird Prompts. We will talk to you next time.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and fall.